The sound of crackling fire was faint at first, almost like the sigh of a tired hearth before bed. But within minutes, that sigh grew into a roar, a monstrous growl rising out of Pudding Lane on a quiet September night in 1666. Imagine it, a single spark leaping from a baker's oven, carried by the wind, nestling itself against dry timber. London, built largely of wood, was a city waiting to burn, and now, in the darkness of early morning, its fate was sealed. "Fetch water, quick!" cried Thomas Farriner, the king's baker, stumbling into the street as orange flames licked the shutters of his home. His neighbors stirred groggily, confused. Fire was common in London, but this one had teeth. It snapped and devoured with terrifying hunger, leaping from beam to beam before sleepy eyes could adjust. A child clutched her mother's gown, whispering, "Mama, is it the end?" And though her mother hushed her, she too felt the dread rising, for in that moment, no one knew that London itself teetered on the edge of destruction. Within an hour, the blaze had already spread to nearby houses, the wind fanning its rage. Sparks flew across narrow alleys, landing on thatched roofs, igniting them like tinder. The city, dense with homes pressed shoulder to shoulder, offered no defense. The fire found fuel everywhere it turned. But here's where the mystery begins. Could it have been stopped? Was this merely an accident? A tragic misstep from a baker's oven? Or was there something more? Rumors would later swirl of plots, of enemies within and without, and of decisions delayed until it was far too late. For now, however, the fire was an unchained beast, and the people of London ran. Some clutched bundles of clothes or hastily gathered valuables, while others carried nothing but their children and their terror. Bells tolled in alarm, summoning bucket brigades, but the flames laughed at their efforts, consuming water as easily as timber. Picture the streets, shadows dancing madly against walls, horses rearing in panic, men shouting orders no one could follow. The fire was alive, fast, merciless and cunning, and at its center, standing helpless before the inferno, was Thomas Farriner, whose oven had sparked the chaos. His face, lit by firelight, seemed etched with guilt and disbelief. A single thought haunted him. What have I done? What began as a simple ember had now transformed into a blaze, destined to carve itself into history. And this was only the beginning. By dawn, the fire had become more than a local disaster. It was a rising sun of flame, climbing above rooftops, painting the London sky in streaks of red and black. Smoke drifted in heavy curtains, choking the air, stinging eyes, and silencing birds. The city, home to nearly 500,000 souls, was waking to a nightmare. From the upper windows of a grand townhouse, a merchant named Edward Russell stared in disbelief. He had seen fires before, but this one moved unnaturally fast. He turned to his wife. "We must leave now," he said, stuffing coins and papers into a satchel. "The river. The Thames will be our escape." The Thames, London's watery spine, quickly became a refuge. By morning, its banks teemed with desperate families dragging carts, animals and children toward the promise of safety. Bargemen shouted prices, exploiting the chaos, while others abandoned possessions altogether, casting trunks into boats just to save themselves. Yet not all would flee. Soldiers and city officials raced to organize defenses. The Lord Mayor, Sir Thomas Bloodworth, was summoned. As he gazed at the inferno spreading from Pudding Lane, his decision or indecision would shape history. Some urged him to pull down houses to create fire breaks, a brutal but effective tactic. Bloodworth shook his head. "Impossible," he declared. "Too costly. Too many would be angered." And with those words, the fire gained a kingdom. In the crowded alleys, panic surged. A butcher tried to drag a cow from his shop, but the terrified beast bolted into the street, scattering people like pins. Sparks rained down, igniting hay, cloth, and barrels of pitch. The blaze surged forward, faster, hungrier, as though it knew no restraint. Among the chaos, a group of children clung to one another. One, a boy of perhaps 12, muttered fiercely, "We must get to St. Paul's. The cathedral will not fall." His faith in the stone sanctuary was shared by many, but even sacred walls could not defy the storm forever. Meanwhile, rumors raced as quickly as the flames. Some whispered that foreign agents had set the fire, enemies of the crown. Others pointed fingers at Catholics, fueling centuries-old hatreds. Fear twisted into suspicion, suspicion into violence. London was not only burning, it was fracturing. And still, the fire grew. The bells rang out again, deep and mournful, echoing through streets now choked with smoke. From the riverbanks, people turned back toward the city, watching their homes vanish into flame. Some wept, some prayed, some simply stared, numb as London's heart began to crumble. What no one yet understood was that the true battle had barely begun. By the second night, London was unrecognizable. What had once been a maze of bustling markets, inns, and timbered homes was now a battlefield between man and fire. The streets glowed red, not with lanterns or candles, but with molten light spilling from collapsing buildings. The wind, once a gentle autumn breeze, had become the fire's fiercest ally. It whipped sparks into whirlwinds, flinging them across rooftops, carrying the blaze into districts. Far from Pudding Lane, the city's defenses crumbled with terrifying speed. The Tower of London, soldiers debated their orders. Barrels of gunpowder sat ready, meant not for war against men, but for war against fire. The plan was brutal: demolish houses, rip down walls, and sacrifice neighborhoods to create fire breaks. Yet hesitation lingered. The longer they debated, the further the flames spread. Meanwhile, ordinary citizens fought their own battles. Edward Russell, the merchant, led his family through smoke-choked lanes, clutching his daughter's hand. Around them, Londoners staggered under bundles of goods. Silver goblets, bedding, even chickens stuffed into baskets. Some guarded their treasures fiercely. Others abandoned them mid-flight, realizing no possession was worth more than breath. "Father, look," Edward's daughter cried. She pointed at St. Paul's Cathedral, rising through the smoke like a stone giant. Its great dome stood defiant, a beacon for those who believed its walls could never burn. God will protect it. But inside the cathedral, reality told another story. Volunteers had rushed in, piling books and manuscripts from the adjoining library in hopes the thick stone walls would keep them safe. Among them, scholars and priests prayed aloud as they worked, sweat streaking their soot-blackened faces. For centuries, St. Paul's had been the soul of London. Surely, they thought, the fire would not dare. Yet outside, the flames crept closer. Embers swirled through the air like fiery snow. Whole markets collapsed, their timbers sending showers of sparks into the sky. The cathedral's lead roof began to soften, drip and sag. Elsewhere, mobs accused strangers of arson. A Frenchman caught in the streets was beaten nearly to death before. Soldiers dragged him away. Spies, voices cried, "Traitors!" In truth, the fire needed no enemy but wind and wood. But fear was a dangerous fuel of its own. On the river, barges swelled with the displaced. Children huddled under cloaks as families whispered prayers, watching the inferno devour the skyline. It was no longer a fire. It was a living creature, roaring and feeding, growing stronger by the hour. And somewhere in the smoke, the fate of London's most sacred landmark hung in the balance. On the third day, the city's heart shattered. St. Paul's Cathedral, the towering pride of London, stood wreathed in smoke. Crowds gathered on the surrounding streets and riverbanks, watching in hushed awe as the flames crept higher. For many, it was unthinkable. The cathedral had weathered centuries of storms. invasions and time itself. Surely it would stand against fire. But the truth revealed itself with a groan. Heat warped the lead roof until it rippled like water. Embers fell upon the books and wooden, scaffolding left by recent renovations, fuel waiting for a spark, and then with a deafening roar the roof collapsed inward. Flames shot skyward, taller than church spires, as if heaven itself had been torn open. Gasps and cries echoed through the crowd. A woman clutched her rosary, sobbing, "If St. Paul's can fall, nothing is safe." Even soldiers, hardened by war, lowered their eyes in silence. Inside, priceless treasures turned to ash. Manuscripts, paintings, and monuments crumbled. Centuries of history disappeared in hours, erased by fire's indifferent hand. The sight broke something deep within the city's spirit. Yet destruction did not stop there. The fire pushed westward, devouring streets in its march. The Lord Mayor's indecision had doomed much of London. But finally, new orders came. King Charles II himself commanded the use of gunpowder to blast fire breaks. Soldiers and citizens alike braced themselves, placing fuses, lighting charges, and stepping back as thunderous explosions shattered rows of houses. The gamble worked, sometimes. Blown-apart walls halted the flames in patches, but elsewhere, sparks leapt across gaps, continuing their advance. It was a desperate chess game, with lives and homes as pawns. Edward Russell and his family reached the outskirts, weary and smoke-stained. From a hill his daughter turned back to the glowing ruin. "Will London ever be the same?" she asked. Edward, unable to answer, only placed his arm around her shoulders. By nightfall, half the city glowed red, and the river mirrored the destruction like a sheet of liquid fire. Refugees slept in fields, in boats, under the stars, their world reduced to what they could carry. Fear still simmered, of traitors, of hunger, of where the fire might strike next. And yet, beneath the despair, a seed of resolve began to take root. London was falling, but would it rise again? The inferno had destroyed landmarks, homes, and lives, but in the ashes, choices waited to be made. Would the city rebuild as it was, or would it transform into something stronger, grander, and unshakable? The answer lay just beyond the flames. By the fourth dawn, the beast had finally grown tired. Exhausted by its own hunger, the fire slowed, its fury waning under calmer winds and desperate human resistance. The city that had once stretched like a living tapestry along the Thames now lay in ruins, smoldering timbers, blackened stone, and endless fields of ash. London was unrecognizable. Nearly 13,000 houses gone, dozens of churches reduced to rubble, entire wards erased. For many, it seemed as though the city itself had died. Refugees wandered the fields outside the walls, their faces streaked with soot, their futures uncertain. Children asked where home was, and parents could not answer. And yet amid despair, a new spirit emerged. King Charles II rode through the ruins, speaking directly to survivors. "We will rebuild," he promised, his presence, rare for a monarch, so close to danger, ignited something in the people. If the crown would not abandon them, then perhaps London's story was not yet over. Ideas began to stir in the ashes. Visionaries like Sir Christopher Wren walked the ruins, sketchbook in hand, dreaming of boulevards wider than the narrow alleys that had fed the flames. He envisioned a city of stone, not wood, of order, not chaos, a London that would not only rise again, but rise stronger. Of course, dreams met resistance. Many citizens demanded their plots returned, exactly as they had been, refusing to sacrifice an inch of ground. Others feared taxes, delays, or that promises of grandeur would never be kept. But still, rebuilding began. Timber was banned for new houses, streets were widened, and the seeds of a modern city were sown. For those who had lived through it, The fire remained more than a physical wound. It was memory, lesson, and scar. Edward Russell, watching his daughter play among the tents of the displaced, understood that they would carry this story forever, not only as survivors of loss, but as witnesses to rebirth. The Great Fire of London had consumed almost everything in its path, yet it had also cleared the stage for reinvention. From its ashes emerged a city that would grow into the heart of an empire, a place where resilience became as defining as the Thames itself. Even now, centuries later, the fire's shadow lingers. Walk the streets of London, and you will see traces, memorials, rebuilt churches, wide avenues that whisper of lessons learned. The blaze was tragedy, yes, but it was also transformation. For in fire's merciless grip, London discovered its greatest strength, the power to rise again. Enjoying this journey into the Great Fire of London? Hit subscribe for more powerful stories that shaped history. If this video pulled you in, give it a like and share your thoughts in the comments. What do you think? Londoners must have felt as the city burned around them.